Hello from the Political Napalm. For this particular video, I wanted to do something a little bit different than the videos that I've done on the channel. This one is more personal to me than a lot of the subjects that I cover, as every single year around September 11th, even now 20 plus years later, 9/11 is something that is a big deal for me every time of the year that it comes around. I'd done a video on this a day or two ago, but unfortunately, because I was using footage in that particular video, I got a copyright pop. Not a strike, like the channel is in perfectly good shape. It's not a content strike. It's just one of those ones where the content is blocked in most countries, which included the US, so I put that video private, and I'm going to be redoing it here in this video even though it's a few days later. So close family knows the story of 9/11 within my family, and close friends know my 9/11 story, but it's not anything that I've ever gone particularly public with. It's not anything that I've really ever discussed outside of more private matters. So for this video, I wanted to use this 9/11 memorial timeline to walk it through that way rather than the footage that I had done in the previous video. So in 2001, on 9/11, I was working for a company in downtown Richmond. It was a company that was in a high-rise building, which would come into play later. Previously, in working for the company, I had been doing a 7 to 3:30 shift, but at that particular time, about maybe 2 months before September, I had switched to a 9 to 6. A month before, almost exactly a month before 9/11, I was back up in New York on Long Island for my grandfather's birthday. So background, I am a former New Yorker, grew up on Long Island, did partake of New York City a decent amount of times in my life. I didn't live there, I didn't go there particularly super much, but it was Long Island, New York City was always a sense of pride. I always loved being from New York and knowing that New York City was in my backyard. When I would go to college outside of New York, the funny thing is everybody would be like, "Oh, you grew up on Long Island. You must have gone into the city so much. Oh, how cool is it that New York City is right there for you?" And my response was, eh. And then I would meet people from the Northern Virginia area, and I'd be like, "Oh, cool, Washington, D.C. How great is that to have Washington, D.C. right in your backyard, and the Lincoln Memorial, and the Jefferson Memorial, and the Pentagon, and the Capitol, and the White House, and the FBI building." And the response was, eh. Oh, and the Smithsonian, because I'd taken several trips to D.C. as a kid in some social studies classes, and I loved going to D.C., and I would meet people who loved going to New York City. So I guess it's sort of the rarity value to me. Getting down to DC was rare, so it was exciting. For other people, was getting to New York City was rare because they didn't live near it, so that was a big deal to them. But I'd been plenty of times growing up. I'd been to the Tree in Rockefeller Center. I had been to Theater in the Round, which is a playhouse that's off Broadway. I've been to the Cloisters. I've been to Statue of Liberty, South Street Seaport, been in and around the area of the Empire State Building, somewhat the NYU area a little bit. I've one particular year in a winter, on a college break, a Christmas break, me and my two childhood friends, we went into the city. We went in with my friend's dad. We did some stuff in the city, complete chaos of bouncing back and forth with taxis and subways and walking and everything. And then we came home with my dad. We basically like passed out on the train coming home from our busy day. So New York City was always there. I had absorbed New York City several times. Those two friends that I went into New York City with, they really wanted to do New York City for New Year's Eve, and they managed to accomplish it one year, but it was a very brutally cold year. So they suffered for it. I never really had much interest in being there on New Year's Eve, but New York City around Christmas is a sight to behold. So I was in the area a month before 9/11, and there I was working at my high-rise job in Richmond. And usually when I get up in the morning, especially back then, I didn't really do much other than get ready and go to work. I was not somebody who watched a hell of a lot of TV or hopped on my computer. I just got up, got dressed, and went to work. So I was driving into work that day, and I did not have the radio on. I had Linkin Park's Hybrid Theory as a CD playing in my car, and at this point it's like right around here. I would have been commuting in right around this 8:42, 8:46 timeline over here, where the first plane crash happens and Flight 93 takes off from Newark over in New Jersey. So I am blissfully unaware of anything that is happening because I have the CD playing in my car. And by a CD playing in my car, I mean I had a CD player hooked up to the power of my car using a headphone to cassette adapter, and a cassette adapter was plugged into my car's cassette deck. At around the time that I got in that car, CDs were well in swing, but I didn't opt to get a CD based radio because I was like, well, you know, at the time it was either CD or tape. It wasn't both. And I was like, well, I can use the cassette adapter to play CDs in my car. There's no other way of playing tapes unless I have a tape deck, so I'll go with the tape deck. And I'm driving in, listening to Linkin Park, which that CD had completely worn a hole in my CD player at that point. I was listening to that CD quite a lot. I get into the area near my job. I park about a block and a half away and in a lot for where I parked. And I walked in and didn't notice anything particularly happening down on the lobby floor. And I'm taking the elevator up to the 6th floor where my job is. We'd previously been in the basement, and then that February of 2001 we'd moved up to the 6th floor. And we get to the 3rd floor, and I see a bunch of people standing in the elevator lobby looking at a flying TV. And in the in the lobby, and I'm like, what the hell was that? Nobody ever does this. What's going on here? So then we go up to the 4th floor, and some people get off and some people get on, and again there's people in the elevator lobby looking at a flying TV. And I stick my head out and I can't really see what's going on. So some people get on, and I was like, why is everybody watching TV? Because this has never ever happened. Those TVs were there, but they always played the basic cable news station of whatever is the channel 0 or the channel 1 of your cable provider and everything. And they're like a plane had just hit the World Trade Center. I said, what the absolute hell? What, are you kidding? And they're like, no. And this is where my brain does something weird. I have a bit of a Mandela effect at this point. I had always thought, the next thought in my head was, again? Because I thought there was an incident with a New York Yankees player that had an incident with a plane where it went down in New York and crashed and everything like that. And I thought, what my thought was at the time was, again, another prop job he had, like a Piper or a Cessna or Sky Cub, like something like that had happened. When I researched that, I found out and this is many, many years later, it was actually last year when I did this research, that New York Yankees event occurred years afterwards. So I don't remember if there was another plane that had a problem that summer and went down New York City or just outside of the city or something. But I thought my first response was, again? So I get out on the 6th floor and I'm staring at the TV and I'm seeing that hole and the damage, and I'm going, oh, this is not a prop jobby at all. This is, what the hell happened? And nobody on my floor was actually looking at the TVs in the lobby, so there was nobody around for me to ask, like, what is going on here? And I'm ridiculously torn between looking at this TV and hoping somebody comes by and actually, like, going to my desk and doing my job like I'm supposed to. So I was like, damn it. And I go to my desk and I, like, log in and everything, and I'm getting set up and people are just very quiet. I'm like, what is happening in New York? And, like, a plane hit the World Trade Center. I'm like, I know, but look at this damage. And they're like, yeah, we think it was a jet. We think it was a commercial plane. And I'm like, holy shit. What is going on over there? How do you make this mistake? Because we didn't really know that it was terrorism quite yet at that point. So everybody's kind of rattled, and things are very not normal at this point. And we all of us are, like, signed in and everything, and a bunch of us do go back to the lobby. And just as I'm getting there, this 9031 happens. And the second tower gets hit. And seeing that explosion and everything, and then people are beginning to realize it was another plane, I'm like, this is not right. We are definitely under attack here. These are no longer accidents whatsoever. This is a lot of trouble now. We are, and I remember thinking, we are now at, like, the brink of war. So everybody is incredibly freaked out. We are in a high-rise building in downtown Richmond, near the river, and everybody is just sort of losing it. We're all kind of zombies. We don't really know what to do. Trying to find information on the internet at this point was really chaotic. In a moment of extreme irony, the person who wrote a lot of the load balancing code for major websites that deal with a lot of traffic was one of the people involved in 9/11. He was on one of these planes, but not a lot of sites had adopted his code yet, so it was really hard to find out information. And I'm just thinking, I'm just kind of a brainless zombie at this point. And then I begin to think, shit, I have 2 uncles that work in the World Trade Center. And now I'm, like, really starting to kind of get panicky. I'm like, what? I don't know what is going on with my family. I gotta find out what is going on with my family. So I'm trying to get calls out to my parents and find out what is going on. And that's actually somewhere here at about, like, 9:20 or so. And I'm not really getting through, and the phones are already starting to have issues with, like, all circuits busy. And I don't think to call my New York family. I'm just focused on my parents at this point. So then the Pentagon attack happens here at almost 9:40. And at this point, rumblings are now starting to start happening in our building. Like, what are we going to do? What is going on over here? And we evacuate. We're like, okay, we don't know if skylines along the East Coast are going to be under attack. This is now way out of hand. We have the 2 attacks in New York. We have this Pentagon one, and it's getting closer. We kind of envision it coming closer down the coast to us, and Washington is only 2 hours away. And even though Richmond is not coastal or accessible by coast, we are a big city in Virginia. We have a very tall skyline. We are up against the river. So we evacuate. About 10, 12 years ago, I discovered one of the reasons why we evacuated, I always thought it was because we were in a high-rise, is because we worked right near a federal building, a Federal Reserve building. A friend of mine had posted that in response to a Facebook post I made, and I was like, oh shit, I did not know that. So at around 10, we go home. And we get evacuated. We're starting our evacuations right here at about like 9:50. We're going out orderly. It's sort of very much like a fire drill. And it's here at 10 o'clock that the South Tower collapses. And I hear this now on the news as I'm beginning my drive home, because I'm not listening to the CD player anymore. And I hear this and I'm like, oh shit, I've got to get home. I've got to reach my family. And at this point, I'm semi-racing home, trying to find out what is happening with the family that I know that works in the World Trade Center. And I get home, and I do get through to my parents, and they let me know that the uncle that is on my dad's side of the family, who works in the World Trade Center, he's safe. He didn't go in that day. Even though telecommuting was not really a thing at the time, he had the ability to work from home, and he was doing it that day. So I found out he was safe. And this uncle actually was in the World Trade Center working when the garage car bomb had gone off. And he had to walk all the way down the flights of stairs from the floor that he was on, with the black smoke and the soot coming up the stairwell, and becoming hard to breathe. And it was very dark, and it was incredibly, dusty and ashy in those stairwells. And threading his way down from that was a nightmare. One he would much rather not ever had to deal with. So that's how I knew that uncle worked in the World Trade Center, as I remember he was there for the car bombing. The uncle on my mother's side of the family, my mother's brother-in-law, I still hadn't heard anything about at this point. So now, somewhere after 10, 15, 20-minute commute or so, I'm now home. And I get in and turn on the TV a little bit before this North Tower collapse, and I see that one go down. And my childhood skyline is gone. It's just different. These iconic buildings that you could always see from the water were just not there anymore, and it looked so eerie. And seeing everybody walk through this, like it was like Vesuvius or Pompeii happening, and all the people who were responding, and thinking of all the people that I know that had gotten in there from the fire department and the first responders, and seeing people run away from that ash cloud, and the infamous dust lady who would later actually die from that exposure. Just seeing the fallout happening, and how people looked, and how, aside from the fact that they were running away and some were crying, everybody was just, they looked dead inside. It was like nobody could believe this had actually happened. And I still don't know what is going on with my uncle. Finally, at about 4 o'clock that day, I hear from my parents. They give me a call, and they said, my uncle is safe. He made it out. So this is the part in the video where my story changes into his story, as this becomes about him at this point. My uncle worked in the Second World Trade Center building, Tower 2, known as the South Tower. He was there that day, and he was working when the first tower was hit. He had said you could hear it, you could basically feel it. There was concussive force that slammed the building, and some people were like, is this an earthquake? And did something explode in this building? And the building rocked to a degree. I'm not saying it swayed in the wind, but the building took a concussive blast when the North Tower was hit. And people started to evacuate. Almost immediately, it was like something big happened. Nobody cares what it is. Nobody knows what it is. Everybody's like, nope, gone. And they started to evacuate. And my uncle had gotten down in from the 80s in terms of his floor and gotten down into the 70s. So he'd gone about 10 flights down, and my uncle was a very fit person, thin, fit, athletic. He was a former long-distance runner, genes that he would pass on to my cousin. I was a sprinter for track in high school. My cousin was a long-distance runner, cross-country. He, even though he was dealing with a disease that was attacking his white blood cells, where his white blood cell counts would spike and dip. They'd just be all over the place. I think it was a form of cancer. He was still very healthy, very active, still very much in shape, despite maybe some banged up knees from years of running. So he was committed to walking down those stairs from being up there in the 80s somewhere for his floor. So in the 70s, an announcement comes on the speakers and says, we're okay. Our building is fine. Nothing has happened to this building. Whatever happened, it happened next door. We're okay. You can go back to work. This is a part of the story where up until this summer, I had a piece of misinformation that I'd been living with, and I didn't get it corrected up until my father told me this summer when we were on the subject that I got this piece wrong. I thought at this point, my uncle's coming down the stairs. He has a good friend of the family with him, a guy by the name of Chappie, that decided, okay, well, I heard the announcement. I'm going back to work. I'm going to head back up and I'm going to work. That's what I thought had happened to Chappie. Chappie was never heard from again. He died in 9/11. And I always thought it was because he chose to go back to work. I found out this summer that was not what happened. Chappie worked for this company, Cantor Fitzgerald. They were in the first tower, otherwise known as the North Tower. He was about 10 floors up from the impact zone. So if you remember, the North Tower was hit higher up. In the mid to upper 90s is where that plane hit. And Cantor Fitzgerald occupied floors 101 through 105. So when that plane struck, the damage in that area was catastrophic. It was immediate with its explosion, the impact. So everybody who worked for Cantor Fitzgerald that had gone into the office that day, including, as you can see here, 46 contractors, food service workers, and visitors that were there, everybody in the Cantor Fitzgerald office died on 9/11 because of their proximity to the first plane hit. And that's where Chappie lost his life. I had that wrong for 20 some odd years. I did not know he was in a different building from my uncle. Why I might have had that screwed up is because my uncle used to work for Cantor Fitzgerald and switched to a different company and that's why he was no longer working in the same building as Chappie. So Chappie hopefully died as quickly as possible and was not one of those people who was trapped up above the impact zone, because in the North Tower, those people could not get down. They could not get down through the stairwells. They were trapped up there, and 658 people died from Cantor Fitzgerald. That company lost almost 70% of its workforce in that attack right there. They've rebuilt, and they do amazing things to honor September 11th every year. But Cantor Fitzgerald would become famously known after this event as being one of the businesses that took the hardest hit from what happened on 9/11. I mean, I can't imagine being one of those people and just coming to work as your average day and sitting at your desk and maybe glancing by a window and seeing this about to happen. It's not something that's very easy to picture, but that's what happened to a friend of the family, Chappie. He knew my aunt and uncle very well. I had met him at several family events that would happen at my aunt and uncle's place. A lot of the summer ones, like Mother's Day and Father's Day and those kinds of ones. Not really like family birthdays or Thanksgiving or Christmas, but the more warmer weather holidays like 4th of July and everything. And I knew this guy relatively well, and it was stunning to hear this. So my uncle did not choose to go back to his floor or work when he heard the announcement in the 70s. He kept going down, and he got into the lower 60s, and some people at that point began to leave the stairwell to go into the elevator lobbies and wait for the elevator rather than walk. My uncle, being athletic, being fit, was like, nope, and just kept going down the stairs and down the stairs and down the stairs, down from the 80s into the 70s where the announcement happened, to the 60s where people were like, oh, the elevators are working, we're going to go wait for the elevators, and made it all the way down, and had a group of people from his company, which was Morgan Stanley. That was the company he worked for in the second tower, or the South Tower. And he's out with his group of people. People are trying their cell phones, which you got to remember, cell phones back then were like the Motorola Biscuit and like some Nokia and Altel ones. It's not like what it is today. So people are trying to do what they can to get a call out and let family know they're okay. And all circuits are busy. Nobody's really able to get a call out. So this group is walking away from the World Trade Center. They get a block away when the 9/03 attack happens. The South Tower hit, and it hit lower. So it hit, I think, in the 60s, 77 through 85, whereas the first one was higher. So to think back at this, my uncle could have, at that first decision point, could have decided to go back to work and said, well, okay, our building's okay. But something in his gut told him, no, you need to get the hell out of here. He could have gone back to work, and he would have been right there in the crash zone. If not, maybe just a few floors above it. So what happened to Chappie in Tower 1 could have absolutely happened to my uncle. Had he chose to get out in the 60s and wait for the elevator, like some other people were doing, he could have been in some very, very serious trouble. Floors 77 through 85, I think it was about 62, 61, where people started to bail on the stairwell. And who knows how crowded those elevator cars would have been. He could have been waiting there 10 minutes for an elevator car. And as you can see, 9:03 was the second one. The first one was 8:46. So this is all happening super fast. This is 15 minutes between the two. And he managed to get a block away and hear that jet roar and turn around and see this. And I can't imagine what it must have been like to think like I was just there. I could have just been there. So him and his group are walking away, trying desperately to get in touch with their family, and cell phone reception is not working that well, and all circuits are busy. So they begin to head towards Long Island, and they make it over the Brooklyn Bridge. And finally, somebody in the group manages to get a call out to their wife back home on the island and say, hey, I'm okay. I've got so-and-so with me, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, and my uncle. And he takes down some names and numbers. He's like, here's who's with me. Here's some family numbers. That wife then calls a bunch of the other family and says so-and-so was okay, they got out. And she basically starts a phone chain going on, letting the families know who made it out. And it was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I finally found out that my uncle had made it out. And that he made these decisions that could have seemed so incredibly minor at the time that completely saved his life. And I spent 20 years thinking Chappie didn't make one of those decisions, and he went back to work, and that's how he had passed away and was never heard from again. It's different. He was with the Cantor Fitzgerald area in the first tower. But my uncle, it's I can't imagine having to think back on that day and think of those decisions and how they saved his life, and how if he had done anything differently, he likely would have died that day. And then after I processed what he went through and what it was like to be only a block away and see his building hit and to have the experience of getting out like he did, my next thought was, okay, so the next day, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, all those days after that, what did he think of for his job? How do you process that? It's not that you're not going in on a day because you're sick, or you're not going in on a day because it's a vacation, or nowadays you're not going in on a day because it's a telecommute day or a flex day or something like that, or we were in the COVID pandemic so everybody's working from home, or it's a natural event happening, a hurricane, a blizzard, that's why you're not going in that day. What is it to think, to wake up in the morning, process everything that you're processing about living through 9/11, knowing you have friends like Chappie that you're not hearing from, you don't know what happened to them, probably thinking they're dead, and then your next thought is, where is my job? My office is gone. My building is gone. As you can see with Cantor Fitzgerald, for the most part, my job is gone, decimated, wiped out. Who do I talk to? Where do I go? How do I to this day would love to pick the brain of my uncle and ask those questions of him. Be like, what were those first few days right after 9/11 like? Like, what did you do? What did you think? Were you in touch with anybody from your job? Did you have anywhere to go? Did you work? Was there a place on the island that you met up? I can't do that because several years after 9/11, my uncle would be bitten by a mosquito down in Florida that would cause a reaction where his brain swelled. And he slipped into a coma and never came out and died from a disease carried by that mosquito that caused basically encephalitis, and his brain swelled and he died. And I can't help but think, what cosmic garbage is it? What crappy fate is it that you lived through 9/11, one of the darkest moments in the United States history, one of the darkest moments of my generation, of Gen X, the darkest moment of Gen X, and die to a mosquito. It's cosmically awful. Fate is garbage if that is fate. To do everything right, to live through all of this, to not be here when the South Tower happened, and not be there when the North Tower happened, and just think of those two decisions that saved your life, and you die to a mosquito. That there's something so wrong with that. And unfortunately I never got to discuss this day further with him and slake my own curiosity. So every year, the 9/11 time of year is something very important to me, and I watch all the specials on the History Channel, the flight ones, the tower ones, the reenactment ones, the sort of like the JFK reenactment ones. It's just, and for Gen X, I mean, we had the Gulf War, but we had no real wars. It wasn't like the boomers with RFK being assassinated, JFK being assassinated, Martin Luther King being assassinated, 4 dead in Ohio, as Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young sings, and the campus and the police brutality and the war protests and the Vietnam War, and for some of them the Korean War, and the civil rights movement and actions and reactions. And here I am with Gen X. Okay, so the Challenger blew up when I was in elementary school, and there was a teacher, Krista McAuliffe, was on there, and it was a very big deal for teachers. So if you were in school, all the teachers were like, there's a teacher on there, we're watching this. And watching in horror as the spaceship lifts off and it's going and just explodes, just shatters in midair. And you have to think of what the teachers are thinking of, like, oh my god, these elementary school kids just witnessed this. What the actual hell? And we got let out of schools like, okay, you're going home, because we all witnessed that. And the Berlin Wall falling, I mean, that's a good thing. That's historic, but that was a good thing. To see this as a Gen Xer, Innocence was completely ripped this day. If we had innocence left of what we were living through with AIDS and college drugs and college sex, and how that was all playing out in the AIDS generation, and the absolute massive bomb that was Woodstock 99, and the abuse and the travesties that happened there, and the internet age exposing some very dark things. If we had any innocence left, we absolutely lost it on 9/11. And being a New Yorker, it is a big deal to me. Having family that could have been there is a big deal to me. Having family who was there is a big deal to me. And his story stays with me year after year. And I was just talking to a coworker this year, and we both said that this, it's 22 years away, but it's never not. And I interjected and I said fresh, and he said yes, exactly. It's never not fresh when this time of year comes around. And we remember the concerts afterwards, like Wish You Were Here from, I think it was Johnny Resnick of the Goo Goo Dolls, and some other, the benefits concert, the Yankee games being held, afterwards, the New York football games, the Mets games, George Bush throwing out that pitch. It's really, really something. And it hit pretty hard again this year. The 20th anniversary year was pretty bad, but this one definitely hit again, too, as I get older and more innocence is stripped and gone, and trying to picture myself having gone through this day and the choices that were made. And I still can't help but think how it's an absolute travesty my uncle lived through this only to die to a mosquito. It blows my mind. But that is me for this episode of the Political Napalm. If you made it this far with me, I appreciate it. I think one of the reasons why it's kind of bad for me this year is seeing more and more of the conspiracy theories come out of jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams, and why did the smaller towers collapse, and why were they on fire, and it's a work of demolition, and just see these crazy theories that there wasn't a plane in the Pentagon, it was an inside job. And I mean, we all know perhaps we blame the wrong people for the wrong reasons after 9/11, but I'm so absolutely sick of the bullshit that surrounds 9/11 and how these theories gain traction, and there's people who try to defy what we saw at the time and what there's video of. And the big one of like, it was a missile who hit the Pentagon, and everybody's like, yeah, but look at these streetlights that were clipped, and this car was clipped by the jet because it was so low. And the video footage is because the frames were so bad, because this was 2001, the cameras were not great. It's just so tiring, and it burns me up when people try to devalue what happened this day and what led up to it and what was going on this day, and to meme it out or conspiracy theory it out. It really gets me, and it was really bad this year. So thank you for sticking with me of this episode of the Political Napalm. And if you have your own 9/11 stories, please let me know down below. I would definitely love to hear them. Thank you.